Welcome, everyone, to another session of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. And today's topic is the brain on mind-body. And we did the brain on success. The last week we did the brain on love. And now we're getting into the body. And the real question, like we asked the brain on love, like what's the real question? The real question for love is, how do I have lasting love? That's really why we want to understand this. But the question for the brain on mind body is, how do I enjoy my body while I have it in this life? So that's kind of the question we're going to try to answer today.
That's a dangerous question to ask.
So we're not just going to teach you what the neurons are, and we're going to actually help you understand how you can live in this body and enjoy your life in this body, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and what was the question for the brain on success?
What is success? What does it mean to be successful? Is it to have a lot of money, acquire a lot of things? How do I have true success?
Yeah.
And feel successful in my work. And we talked about purpose being that. So, yes. So we have this. And then next week, we're going to be talking about the brain on God. So we're doing all of the major parts of life. But today we're talking about our favorite topic, the body, mind.
And what does the brain have to do with all this?
What does the brain have to do with our body?
Yeah. So let's jump right in. We'll start with what the research from neuroscience says about the brain and its interaction with mind.
Okay. What does it say, Dr. Rob?
Yeah, and this is pretty current research. So people have been looking, neuroscientists have been looking at what's happening with these long-term meditators. Because if you want an example of people that are actively working with their mind, what's going on in the brain? Is it really impacting the brain somehow, right? And we can think of the brain as the hardware, the physical wetware of the 3 pounds in our skull. And the mind in this case is the idea of meditation, the idea of going inward, of working on the mind directly. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But some of the findings are incredible. So long-term meditators, meaning people that do more than weekend meditations or anything like that.
They're just visualizing
and some of these people,
their goals.
Some of these people are monks that have spent 20, 30 years meditating on a daily basis and hours meditating. But they also have found that even a few weeks of meditation begin to affect these changes. So what are the changes that are going on when we look at the brain through the MRIs and the functional MRIs? One of the things that has consistently been found is that the hippocampus, which has to do a lot with learning and memory, begins to grow. It begins to grow and to function better, of course, meaning you have better memory, better recall of information that you've stored in your brain. It's improved by simply paying attention to your mind.
And what's the benefit of having better memory? Sometimes it's better to forget. What is the benefit?
You'll remember where you left your keys.
And your cell phone.
That's right.
No. What is the benefit?
No, in this sense, it helps you, of course, retain information better. So if you think about what is learning is retaining information and being able to call it up when you need it to problem solve.
So the more information you can retain, the more understanding you have about yourself and the world and how it works. You
can function a lot better in your job, in your relationships, etc. Okay. The other one is the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is very deep in the brain structure, and it's part of the limbic system, which is the mammalian brain, and it has to do with fear, the fight or flight,
fight or flight.
Yeah.
Fight, flight, or freeze.
In other words, that kind of fear reaction that helps us survive. What happens there when you look at long-term meditators is that the amygdala actually starts to shrink, which means you're not as fearful.
Well, that's a good thing.
You're not as afraid. But in practical terms, you're not as anxious.
So that helps the body too, because if it's always in fear and anxiety.
Well, let's say the amygdala is the body. The way we're defining it, the body is the physical structure that we're...
But the other parts of the body, like heart rate and
it's
blood
all
pressure
connected, absolutely. If you think, well, what is how does the amygdala help us survive? It activates these different glands in the body that release adrenaline and different neurotransmitters to help us survive.
Do you think that the modern man, their amygdalas are very large because there's a lot of stress? Like people that, like in the fast-paced Western world, do you think our amygdalas are really
some of the research indicates that most of us are chronically stressed. So the system was designed to quick activation, run away from the danger, get away from it, and then relax, right? Whereas constant stress, chronic stress, you're always on high alert. Your system is revved up all the time, and so the amygdala is overworking, and it gets used to being on high alert.
So when someone has like a PTSD, like come back from a war or something happens to them, that amygdala, is that would be the structure of the brain. That's
part of it. That you can think of it as being left turned on because of that traumatic experience. And now the person, when they hear a loud sound, it reminds them of the trauma or the life-threatening experience that they went through.
Or they have like dreams about it, or they think about it and obsess about it, and then it kind of because the mind doesn't know the difference between it's really happening and what it's remembering. So it kind of gets stuck in a way there in that process.
Yes.
So meditation is really great for that as well.
Yeah, we'll talk more about how do we work with this
how to
stuff.
Shrink your amygdala.
So now we have these both very deep structures in the brain, the hippocampus, which has to do with memory, learning, and the amygdala, which has to do with fear and the fear response. But also, long-term meditators, there's a little sign up, not sure what that is. Long-term meditators have an increase of functioning in their prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is that part of the brain that's right in front, behind your forehead. It is what distinguishes us from most apes. If you ask what is the difference between a chimp and a human being,
besides less hair,
it's the prefrontal cortex.
Okay. You notice we have like a more rounded front and they're flat.
Yeah. The prefrontal cortex is really what has allowed us to create computers and jet planes and
wars.
That too, of course. But when you talk about ADHD, when you talk about OCD, impulse control problems, you're talking about a dysfunction of the prefrontal cortex. It's not doing what it's meant to be doing. It's unable to
focus, basically?
It's unable to direct the rest of the functions of the mind, like memory, recall, attention. It's not able to do it well.
So it's sort of like, I've heard it called like the traffic. It like kind of directs the traffic to the rest of the brain. Yeah. But if it's not strong, it's just kind of like the gate's open and,
it's chaos.
Yeah, it's like more chaotic.
It's chaotic.
And so some people have that that experience of feeling very chaotic. And with this, is this why when we're really upset emotionally that we kind of lose our logic and we kind of so it overrides that prefrontal cortex to say, the impulse control to say, relax, that's just a post on Facebook. It's not going to threaten your life, but you get like all upset and
Yeah.
Well, not me. I don't do
Or that the conversation we had on love.
Yeah.
A lot of the hormones and neurotransmitters associated with attraction and falling in love override the prefrontal cortex. So we're not able to make decisions in a clear, logical way. Mm-hmm. So the executive functioning, as it's called, allows us to really take control of our own mind. Mm-hmm. And that's a great ability to have. And when we don't, we can't really make decisions in a clear, logical way.
Mm. And so so now we have this, so how do we have this default that we've basically been conditioned. A lot of people talk about conditioning and programming. So each of us has our own unique way, the way the brain has been structured to respond to the external. That's our default. And so some people have like a higher tolerance for pain and stress, and other people, it's like one little thing can set them off. So that's based on a lot of factors, not just not every human being is exactly the same, because we all have different genetics and different environments we grew up in, and different cultures and different spiritual disciplines that are culturally influence how we see the world.
Yeah, so the default, it's called the default mode network, are these parts of the brain that light up when we're not focusing on anything. In other words, we're not doing homework, we're not intently focusing on our work. We're kind of driving to work, or we're going to we're on autopilot, and these parts of the brain then come into play. That's why we often drive somewhere or drive to work, kind of the routine, without even thinking about it. And we do it well.
We get in the shower, we do our routine, and like, did I shave my legs today? I don't know. I can't remember, because we're just on autopilot.
Bigger implications is for art and sports. If you think of what people call the flow.
Oh, yeah.
If you overthink it, you're interfering with what your body knows to do and to do well.
Like Simone Biles experienced in the Olympics.
Yeah, when the prefrontal cortex and other logical part of the brain kick in, it interferes with these networks that are already good at doing what they do. Mm-hmm. And so you interfere instead of helping. You're overthinking it.
You're trying too hard.
Yeah. If
you're trying to rationally create something, and creativity comes from more open flow than practical step-by-step logical steps. Creativity comes in a lot of different ways. I know that a lot of people, they talk about with musicians when they come up with their the kind of the pop, the Beach Boys, right? They came up with their pop Beach Boy singing, and that one person, Brian Wilson, he was wanting to do something completely different, and it was so illogical. But that's kind of that's where he was in the flow versus doing the formula. I also think too, when it comes to personal growth, and one of the things that Jung says is that when you're approaching personal growth, there isn't a formula, because the psyche, everyone's so individual. So if you approach it in a formulaic way, you're actually overthinking it, and you're getting in the way of a natural process of creative transformation that's happening within you.
Yes. By the same token, when you do want to concentrate, and meditators then have, they're better able to direct the mind in this way, so that when they do want to focus, they're able to shut everything off and focus intently on that one subject or one point. Mm-hmm. That is a very powerful tool, because if you think what distinguishes successful people from people that are not as successful, it's the ability to focus.
So you need both.
You need both.
You need the focus, but also you need to know when to let go of it. Yeah. It's that not too tight, not too loose. You don't want to be completely unorganized, but you don't want to be completely so tight up, that there's no room for flexibility and create, or rigid, I guess would be.
Yeah, so if we look at all this data from neuroscience and say, well, what is this pointing to? Like, what is the benefit of meditation? It's the ability to choose how you're using your mind at will, which is an incredible idea.
Instead of letting your mind drive.
Instead of letting your mind go by the habits of the circumstance of your environment, which condition the mind. We know conditioning is always impacting the way we behave.
So can we just make a distinction between the brain and the mind?
Yeah, so that's what we need to figure out, because the mind-body problem, as it's known in psychology, is this particular question, is how can these neurons, which are cells like physical cells in our brain, create what we call the mind, which is our experience of the world, of ourselves, our thoughts, our dreams, our emotions. There's no logical way to explain how the brain does this. But
so the mind isn't just thoughts. Like a lot of people think my mind, my thinking is my mind.
Exactly. It's a lot more.
Because now we're talking about the mind body, which is the intelligence of the psyche that's driving all the kind of traffic in our bodies and our experience and our dreams. And so the brain is, what would you say is the tool that the mind uses? The mind arises.
It's a two-way street.
So the mind doesn't arise from the brain arises within the mind.
Well, let's back up a little bit, so we don't confuse people. Let's look at the biology of it.
Okay.
Let's just stay on what we're able to observe and what we know. Let's say what science agrees on and what we can agree on.
Okay.
So we know we have a brain. Hopefully everybody has a brain and it's working relatively well. We know if the brain is damaged, meaning the physical part of the brain, right? If I'm in a car accident and part of my brain is lopped off for some reason, I know my mind is not going to be functioning the way it was before the accident. I'm going to have to figure out things in a new way, in a different way. But there is this power that the brain has called neuroplasticity, meaning that it can relearn to do these things with whatever capacity is left.
There was one where a girl had a half a brain, or she had her brain, she had a tumor, so they had to take out, and they thought, well, she wouldn't have some faculties, but then the other side of the brain basically filled in all the details for both sides, acting out of one, which means that the brain itself isn't the end all. There's another consciousness that has the information. It's not in the physical.
That's part of it. A big part of the mind-body question is precisely that: is how can the brain then recreate the mind again, or attempt to recreate the mind the way it existed before it was injured or damaged by a lesion. And this kind of sets up the mind-body question, the mind-body problem, right? That if you think of a tiger, for example, you know that image that you hold in your mind of a tiger is not going to hurt you, right? You just intuitively know, I'm imagining it, I'm thinking about it, and I'm experiencing it, but it can't hurt me. Whereas if you perceive a real tiger...
The tiger came in right now. I think the fight or flight, our amygdala would go, woo!
That's right. It's a different experience, right? A totally different experience. So what is going on in the mind and what is going on in the brain, in neuroscience, they say, well, it correlates. That is, when you imagine a tiger, certain parts of your brain light up, including kind of the run for your life, fight or flight system. but of course, your higher functioning is able to override it and say you're imagining it. Don't run. Just like when you're watching a movie, you're caught up in the action and you're kind of putting the logical reason on pause to be able to enjoy the movie and go along with the story. But it's not going to hurt you. Right? What's going on the screen is not able to hurt you. So we can think of the brain as the body, or part of the body, and the mind as the thoughts, the subjective experience that we're having of the world and ourselves in the world.
And like kind of the interpretation of emotions, because emotions aren't really, we have sensations in the body, and then the mind creates the labels and the kind of associations. So when we're not really feeling emotion, we're not really feeling emotion in the body, we're feeling a sensation, but the mind is processing the feeling and interpreting it.
Yes.
So that's where like a lot of people think the emotion is in their body, but actually it's in your mind, and your body is just feeling something, and your mind is telling you if it's good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, and based on that experience. So that's
right. And so just at the biological level, we know, and this is, let's say you can verify it for yourself, right? Because we've all experienced worry. So what's going on when we worry is our mind, not our brain, but our mind is running through all these worst case scenarios. And we're thinking, what if the worst happens? Oh my God, am I ready? And what will I do when this...
I've never worried.
No, you never worried. When this terrible thing happens, what am I going to do? And it's going to play out this way or that way.
Catastrophizing.
Now that we know will impact the structure of the brain, in essence. It will cause the amygdala to start to grow and to kind of be more active. So we're training the brain.
We're training our own brain to worry, and then it's kind of it gets in a habit of worrying.
That's right, because now an overactive amygdala will also create more worry.
So next time I worry, you could just say your amygdala's overreacting right now.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there you see kind of why it's so important to work with the mind in order to start to train our brain to work in a proper way where it helps us. If we leave it up to our past experiences, all those little traumas and difficulties that we experienced in the past are going to be dictating how we see the world right now.
Like we're still living the past in the present.
Yes. Whereas if you're able to say, use your mind, right? Use some of this knowledge to reshape your mind, then you're able to train it in a proper way.
So that would be called
neuroplasticity.
Or
self-directed neuroplasticity.
So we have neuroplasticity already. We're always constantly learning. So we go into an environment and our brain is kind of processing and picking up things, learning something new. Every time we read a book or you're listening to this podcast or watching a video, your brain is basically opening up new ideas. It's constantly evolving. But what we want to do is not just leave it up to the brain to just be like, oh, I think I know what that means based on the past. We want to be able to direct what we want it to mean and what we want to step into, who we want to be in the world through that.
That's right.
Now, for me, there's a lot of, when I first became a hypnotherapist, a lot of reprogramming. There was a lot of that. Retrain your brain to think positive and to stop eat, like I would do weight loss and quit smoking. So is that what you're talking about here?
Pretty much. There's a whole spectrum of brain training or brain reprogramming programs and techniques that have existed from a long time ago, right? Yoga is one of the best research and best known methods of retraining your mind body, or of using your mind, your higher faculties, to have an impact on your mind. On your body, and reshape your brain in a very direct way.
So the question is then, are we using what decision, where are we making that decision from, or where we're directing it? Is it directed from the ego? That I want to use my brain capacity to lose weight so I look more attractive, or I want to use my brain capacity and train it to think more positive so I can make more money, or I want to use my brain capacity to feel more confident so I can find a relationship. Those are basically, they're great things and tools, but then you're only staying at that ego level, and you're assuming that the prize is really just getting the goods out in the world, and that you're defined by those goals. So there needs to be another level. There needs to be, I mean, that's a really great, it's a great that we have that tool. We can direct our mind. We can train our mind. But when we talk about the spiritual element of the mind body, what's possible for us? That we can not just rearrange the furniture, or what I would call ego rebuilding, or reframing, or reprogramming the ego. How can we transcend and go to even a higher level of being in the world than just making sure the mind body feels comfortable and has the delicious things in life? There has to be another level that we can go to.
Right. So there we're leaving the realm of biology and entering the realm of psychology, because now you're talking about the ego, which is a kind of just like our phones have apps that help it function. Our mind has an app called Ego.
I love that.
That helps us interface with the world, with the environment.
So it's an app that comes with it's a part of the operating system. We have a little app that Ego.
It's part of the software.
And how would you define the ego?
Yeah, so it gives us a sense of identity, a sense of self. Like, I'm an individual and I can make decisions. When I look at the environment, it's separate from me, the environment, and then I'm stepping into that environment and interacting with it as an individual. But it's the app that's giving me that sense.
And it's tied to the body.
It's very much tied to the brain, brain function. And so when we ask, is that app really telling us or giving us true information about what's going on out there? Or is it more like a subjective experience that helps us survive? And it's the latter. It's a subjective experience of ourselves that helps us interact with the environment, the immediate environment.
So if we're programming our mind from that survival standpoint of, when I get that partnership, I'll feel more like I'll be okay. I'll feel safe. When I get the money, if I have enough money in the bank, I'll feel safe. If I have the right, body, if I lose 10 pounds, I'll feel better. Like, there's some security in there. And even our health, there's this, of course, when we're unhealthy, we feel unsafe. We feel like we're going to die. So there's that natural mechanism of self-preservation. And, but that's only one way, beginning way to work with the mind and self-direct. And I always call it the step one of self-awareness, is that we do need to kind of go into this type of understanding our mind, and that we can create our reality and kind of create things that are maybe ego-based just to get started. But once we learn that, there's another level to go to.
Yeah.
So how do we operate outside of the app? What's the other app that we have?
Well, in Jungian terms, let's say the ego's function is to create a persona, to create an avatar, right?
For the app.
To follow the computer analogy, it would be like, reality is the environment that we're moving in, the virtual environment, and we create the avatar from the ego in order to have an identity within that virtual reality, that we are interacting.
So it's
with
kind
the
of like an
environment.
icon on our phone is our little app for our ego. It's our little icon in the world.
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with this. We don't consider that pathological in any way. That's what we're meant to do, to interface with the environment. Because remember, in the beginning of the series, we said it's always a brain-environment interaction that we're talking about. The brain cannot be understood on its own without understanding its environment that it evolved in, that it grows in, that it moves in. So that function of interacting with the environment is really important in the mind body, because it gives us a sense of control, that I'm making decisions. I have free will in the environment, but it's an illusion essentially. It's more that because we are so conditioned by our past experiences, like learning, like we were saying, we're not really making free will decisions. It appears that we are, but we know from neuroscience that our brain is reacting to the environment and is making the decision before we're conscious of it. About 8 seconds on average before we are aware that we've decided something.
But then the ego takes credit for the decision.
Yeah, then the ego kind of makes a rationalization as to why we decided that, and then it fits in, and we.
I know. Sometimes I think, well, if you've ever made a bad decision, look back, and how your mind tries to rationalize how you made that bad decision. Why did I get in that relationship? Why did I invest in that thing? Program that I didn't like, or buy this car that that was way too expensive for me, or not nice enough, or something. Like, why do we do all that? And we can drive ourselves crazy trying to think about how we made that decision and beat ourselves up from that decision. But that makes it easier that we didn't make it, the ego didn't make it, that it's part of our karma, that what we're really seeing is it's much deeper than you. Like, I think it's freeing in a way from guilt and shame. What frees us from guilt and shame when we make bad decisions, because we know we didn't make them consciously. But then it feels powerless, because then we're like, well, who is making that decision? And how do I tap into that decision-making process so I can create the life I want?
Yeah. And so, well, if we look at some of the most advanced systems, like the Upanishads and the yoga system, right, the yoga philosophy of the mind body, what they were saying is that as long as you're not perceiving the truth directly, you're essentially projecting your own conditioning, your own assumptions, like we were saying, your own past experiences onto the present moment, then you're not seeing reality. What you're seeing is your own conditioning, right?
It's an apparent reality.
Yeah. In a sense, you're creating your own reality by bringing all that baggage of past experience into the moment. It's very much tied to karma, what is in the East called the karmic imprint, or your stored up karma. You're bringing it into the present moment. So,
for example, if you're worried about something that hasn't happened yet, what you're really doing is your mind is bringing in all the karma from what you believed in the past about what maybe the worst case scenario of what can happen. And you're creating a hell in your mind before it even happens. It's what they call it, pre-suffering. Have you heard of that? Worry is pre-suffering. Like you're worried, and so you're already suffering. Yeah. And how many times have we done that, where we worried so much and we spent so much of our energy suffering when everything turned out okay? It's just like, we all wish we can go back to our younger self and say, it's going to work out, you're going to be fine. That problem that you thought was so big when you were 10 or 12 or 17 or 30, you're going to overcome that. But in the moment, we're playing off that. We're making a world, or a perception of a world that is not really real, but it's an experience that we're having that's taking us away from the true nature of reality. And so it keeps us stuck in this idea of suffering, worry, and
Yeah, we're essentially just replaying the old programs that were
like a
instilled in us by conditioning, by let's say the mind, and the mind is doing its job. In other words, we don't consider even that pathological because that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to help you learn from your past experiences so that you're ready. If it happens again, you're ready. You learned it, right? You learned the lesson. The only problem is that if you never get to the point of consciously retraining your mind, you're stuck there. You just replay the same old patterns. What Jung would say, well, you're stuck in the persona. You're thinking, I am the persona. I'm this app or this avatar that I created for myself, and that's as far as I go.
So you're saying the solution is to retrain the mind.
Absolutely, you have to.
But isn't there a higher level that you want to go to than just think positive?
Yes, because what retraining your mind will do is it'll give you a direct experience of the true reality or the true nature.
So reprogramming. Are you saying reprogramming or training your mind to be more conscious?
Well, let's say retraining or reprogramming will open up your eyes.
Okay.
Because think of it this way.
Well, you have to learn to perceive, like you said, the brain is the organ of perception.
That's right.
So what we want to do is retrain the brain to perceive the world differently.
Yes, to understand what is perception.
Yeah.
Right. What is the nature of perception?
So this is more than just I don't love myself. I love myself. Reprogramming. Right. That's what I'm trying to distinguish, because I think people think reprogramming is just. I mean, I used to think that it was just thinking positive thoughts and feeling positive emotions and having that positive energy is like programming myself to be more positive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
or more. Like thinking I can do anything I want.
Yeah, but see, here now we're leaving the realm of psychology and entering the realm of spirituality.
Yes, we want to leave the realm of, we want to go there.
Because now you're talking about consciousness,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And consciousness is not the mind. This is a big misunderstanding in the West. When we talk about thoughts and emotions, in the West, we're used to thinking of that as consciousness. Like if I'm thinking, that means I'm conscious and I'm using consciousness. But in the East, which has a much more sophisticated way of understanding consciousness, that is not consciousness. That is the human mind you're talking about. That is the human experience of memory and perception.
And I think because people confuse conscious mind to consciousness.
Yes, that's part of it.
Yeah, there's a confusion. I think that happened on one of the other classes podcasts we had. Someone asked that question. So it's the conscious, we're conscious. There's a conscious part of our mind that our awareness of ourselves and our thoughts. And then there's consciousness, which is more one consciousness the soup of what we live in. Like everything has consciousness from the Eastern perspective.
That's right. So if you think of a fish in water, we are fish in the water of consciousness, the ocean of consciousness, right? And we live in it, and so we don't see it. Because if you ask a fish, look, what is this thing called water? It would say, well, what water? It's just the way things exist. It's just the way I live.
Well, in order to see consciousness, we have to be outside of it to see it, but there's nothing outside of consciousness, so you can't really see it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the tricky part of it, right?
In the Upanishads, it says that it doesn't have any qualities, and that's why you can't see it. Anytime you try to see it, you have to give it a name and a form. And anytime you're talking about name and form, you're talking again about the mind, right? Because that's how we use the mind, is to perceive form and name things, right? Identify things. So that's part of where meditation comes in. Meditation, the true aim, it's not stress management or relaxation. Its primary aim is to realize that pure consciousness at the center of your being. And a lot of it is more about letting go instead of acquiring something. A lot of people think, oh, it's kind of a special state of mind that I need to acquire. No.
Like you have to reach it, but it's already there. It's just that our human mind is covering it up.
That's it.
And distorting our self-perception.
Yes. So the road inward, right, is about de-identifying with our ego, with our persona, with that avatar that we created to interact with the world. Not to get rid of it, but to understand its nature, that's not who we are. It's a tool that we use.
Just like our body and mind isn't who we really are. There's something more to us.
Yeah, at the spiritual level, then that makes sense, right? That as we learn to understand the nature of our bodies and our brains and what they're doing and their function, we're free from that misperception, that misconception that we are the body and we are the brain. And in a sense, we are those things, but those things exist within us, not the other way around.
So when we think about the amygdala, back to the biology of it all, if we realize that we are that consciousness, that we're not the ego, wouldn't that change the quality of the amygdala? Because we wouldn't worry so much, because we wouldn't think of that you're this I've heard it like the ocean of consciousness, and we're this cork that's bobbing on the top of the ocean. The ego is like that cork that's being pushed away by the storms and the waves, and just kind of like has no ability to self-direct. It's just kind of reacting to life. Versus you're the ocean, and then you can support the ego and enjoy. Like, we don't want to get rid of the ego, because this app that we have helps us have wonderful food and relationships and experience pain and joy and sex and what else do we get? Abundance, and see beautiful things in the world, and I don't know, hold the baby, like all these wonderful experiences, love another person, that we want to have that ego experience because it has the duality, but we also don't want to think that that's it. Because if we do, then we're only happy half of our life. We're only happy when everything is good on that side. So having the higher consciousness helps us dance in the duality, but also not get so attached to it that we define ourselves by it, and that make us suffer.
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, and get home before dinner.
But that's right? Really, but what happens to the brain when we, like they said the amygdala shrinks, not because these monks were less stressed. I mean, they probably were, but they weren't. They were less stressed not because they were meditating. They were less stressed because the meditation led to the self-awareness that there's nothing to worry about. So it's, instead of retraining your mind to say, don't worry, everything happens for a reason, you're seeing this beautiful, like, the truth shall set you free. That's the whole idea, is that, if you're not free, that means you're seeing a distorted reality.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's right. And also that these monks, let's say their function is not just to meditate. Mm-hmm. In other words, they're not. That's not what you're looking at when you're looking at a monk's brain. There's somebody that's just meditating. They're also learning, right? They're also reading about consciousness and about the mind. In other words, they're feeding their knowledge, their higher knowledge of what is the nature of reality, and then meditating on those things. So a lot of the mistake we make in the West is we think the techniques are what's having the impact.
Yes.
But the techniques are nothing without the philosophy, without the right understanding and use. So it's like a tool. If you don't know what the tool is designed for, you might be able to use the tool, but you're using it in a very primitive or limited way.
I remember Ram Dass said that for the first 26 years of meditation, he was meditating on his delusions, and he wasn't really getting anywhere. He was just like thinking about his mind. And then finally he realized that he was not using the technique, directing it in the way that it was meant to be directed. So let's take it down to practicality, mind body. People want to have healthier bodies. They want to, they're struggling with weight or struggling with anxiety, depression,
OCD.
Yeah, and
ADHD,
and even like autoimmune diseases and stuff like that, like physical pain and cancer. And so the first step would be to start believing that you can self-direct the body. So the very first level is just kind of believing that the body can heal itself, setting that, training your mind to believe in the possibility that you can affect your body through the power of your mind. And then the next level would be realizing that you are more than just the body. So the first step maybe is just that the mind can direct it, but the higher state would be that you're not the body. Ultimately, that you're this great higher consciousness, a part of something bigger, and that there's nothing to fear. And I think the spiritual philosophy of losing the fear of attachment to the body actually helps the body heal. There's even research on that when we get into that relaxation response, the body automatically goes into homeostasis, and the body knows what to do to balance itself. So as soon as, a lot of people would talk about, just like when I did a lot of hypnosis for pain management, they said a lot of it is just getting their mind away from focusing on the pain, and then the body will do what it needs to do. But when we focus on the pain, what happens is the mind is directed on the pain and it amplifies. And so we end up, we have an untrained mind where we feel pain in our body, we have a backache or stomach ache, and then we think about it. Or we have a headache, migraines, is all about the mind. I always tell people, if you have a migraine, put your feet in hot water, because then you're focusing your mind on your feet. You're bringing that blood down, your attention to another part of your body. And so we could start doing that on a functional level, but then the next level is, now that you can control your body, let's see if we could transcend it now and get to this place where we're not a prisoner to our body and a slave to how it reacts, and feel that it's doing something to us versus we can be in control of it.
Yes.
Like our brain, our urges, our focus, all that.
Yeah. I love that movie, the book, The Life of Pi. Mm-hmm. So for those of you that haven't read it or haven't seen the movie, The Life of Pi is about this boy who is shipwrecked he survives on a small boat, but a tiger manages to get on the boat with him because they were on a ship that was transporting a whole circus or a zoo full of animals, and the tiger happens to jump into the boat with him.
The life raft, yeah.
So now he's stuck in the middle of the ocean with his tiger on board. And if he doesn't learn to tame the tiger is going to have him for lunch. That's very much the situation with us. We have this very powerful mind that is able to create our reality and the way we experience the world. But if we don't train it, if we don't manage to train it to find a way to coexist with it in a harmonious way or in a leadership way, because he learns eventually to tame the tiger.
He has become the alpha.
That's right. What is the alpha element in our mind? It is that self-directed ability, that self-reflective ability. In some traditions, it's called the Buddha mind or the Buddhi. It is the intellect, we might say, the ability to observe our own mind, our own behavior, our own emotions. That capacity has to be expanded, cultivated, so that it becomes the dominant force in our mind, and then is able to tame the rest of the functions of the mind and bring it under control. Otherwise, the tiger is going to eat us for lunch, meaning it's going to dictate to you what kind of relationships you're going to have, what kind of work you're going to do, et cetera, et cetera. It eats up our life. It eats up our time on earth, and we don't get to find happiness, fulfill our purpose, because the tiger is dominating us.
Well, I want to say that a lot of people, think about like changing their thoughts. And when you say retrain, I know for me, again, I would think that thinking more positive is thinking positive is the goal to retrain. But what you're saying in retraining is not thinking a certain way, but perceiving yourself in a certain way. So you're training yourself to see as the higher self versus the ego. That's really the training, not the content of your thoughts or the content of your emotions. I mean, that comes into play. It's that self-realization that we're really trying to train our minds to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I was, let's say, in trying to be practical and trying to think in terms of where do we start?
Yeah.
Right. We have to start with this idea of, okay, my mind is torturing me by causing me fear. Like the boy in the boat was afraid of the tiger in the beginning. He was terrified of it. He knew if that tiger was set loose on him, it was going to have him for lunch. So he had to find ways to survive, first of all.
Yes, but I think that some people are terrified of their negative thinking.
Yeah.
And so they get into this pushing away of that negative thinking.
Yes.
That kind of retraining, like almost like the tiger is our negative thoughts or anger, and we got to get rid of it versus understand it. So it's more retraining our perception of it versus retraining it to be different in a way, like perceiving it differently, so then it appears differently.
Yes, but I think that initial reaction is part of it, that we have to suffer a little bit. In other words, we have to experience that fear and dread a little bit so that it motivates us to find a way.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, people tell us, oh, I'm doing fine. Everything's going great. Why would I want to change? Why would I need to work with my mind if I have it made? Then they're not motivated to change. Whereas those of us that experience hardships in early life, we know, hey, we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to take the reins of our mind if we want to get out of this alive somehow. And so it prompts us to do the internal work.
Well, I think I'm talking about attachment, that we are attached to our minds being a certain way so we can get things, like retraining our mind to find love or to find money, and that kind of we could get caught up in the attachment to that training, right? Like, oh, I'm thinking, like beating ourselves up if I have a thought or worry about money and saying, oh no, now I'm creating lack in my life. So it's that kind of, I have to train my mind to think positive. That's what I'm talking about, is that more of seeing the bigger picture versus just like kind of attached to.
Well, I'm a little bit more tolerant with people because I've made all those mistakes myself.
No, I know. I'm just saying that's not the be all end all.
I was very much attached to, getting it right, to thinking positive, to doing the right things and appearing to others to be spiritual. I think it's just part of the process that we have to go through. It's like layers of conditioning, layers of ego.
So it's like stage one is, like I said, that first stage is like learning that you can actually change your mind.
Yeah.
But there's also that other level of that's not going to be enough for you, because eventually you can get all those things, but then there's also this other place that you can go.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's where mentors, teachers, coaches come in, that we can avoid a lot of the mistakes by listening to good teachers, good mentors, right? That they've gone there before. They've gone through the process. And of course, most of us still don't learn. We have to experience it ourselves, make those mistakes ourselves. But if we persist, then we find a way to work and to coexist with our mind.
And our mind isn't always going to behave. So it's this constant, like the tiger, you have to constantly be on alert, because the ego is the app that we're with is still going to do what it always does. It's always going to go back. So it's about that balance of understanding that we're not the ego.
Yes. And back to the metaphor of the boy and the tiger, he didn't want to kill the tiger. He could have at some point, because he understood, if I kill this tiger, I kind of kill my soul, my essence, right? He represents his...
Well, he felt one with the tiger after a while.
Yeah,
like they were like together on this, like we're together on this boat. It's like that metaphor of we're in the same boat, basically.
Yeah.
You're a part of me.
So we have to take care of our mind body, nourish it, respect it. But at the same time, we have to use our higher faculty of consciousness to train it, to dominate it, to learn to direct it.
And not being in such a harsh judgment of ourselves when we are caught up or we're worried, to kind of feel like I got to get away from, like almost like I got to stop this bad habit, like almost beat ourselves up about it.
Yeah.
Of our habits and like only praise ourselves when we do well. It's to open up that whole wonderful experience of loving the ego and understanding its nature.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, right? Because ultimately, a lot of this distinction between the self, the true self in us, and the mind body is leading us to understanding that there's no difference. But in the beginning, because our perception is so split that we think I'm inside this little body and the world is out there, we have to work in that respect, that the higher faculty is training or reshaping the brain and the body, but ultimately then you realize there's no difference. We are the self, and our body is the higher self as well, because our bodies are also made of awareness, of consciousness. Yeah. And so it's ultimately one, but to get there is that journey of transformation. Somebody's asking, what happens to our consciousness when we die? Now, here again, we're leaving the realm of biology, psychology, and entering into mysticism or spirituality. And the Upanishads are the best guide for that. So the Upanishads say, if you think in terms of what is it that you're experiencing when you're alive in this world. So it says there's two main principles. One is completely still and clear and eternal, which is the true self. And the other one is always changing and moving and morphing, which is called Maya. So you have these two opposing principles. One being completely still, eternal, and one being completely the opposite, always moving and morphing. Now, if you think, well, what is this body made out of? Maya, right? It's the appearance of things. It's always morphing and
it's
moving.
It's aging. It's getting sick. It dies. And
so what survives and what is eternal in us is that still point, the true self. It is eternal and indestructible. The appearance of things, our mind body, it's always morphing.
It's almost like we die every day in a way. Like there's the person we were last year is no longer around. The child we were is no longer around. It's not in this reality anymore, unless we carry the memory.
That's right.
And live there. But we, it's like we die every night, go to sleep, we go into that pure consciousness and come back and we just pick up where we left off. But
so individually, let's say in your individual experience, that eternal part, that immutable part is called the Atman, and the Atman is indestructible, it's eternal.
So it doesn't die.
You never die.
You were never born.
And not in the temporary sense. It's an appearance of Maya. It's a beautiful play, dance, because Maya translates as magic, as dance, as power. So it's the powerful dance of creation that we're witnessing. And the witness mind is that Atman. It's the one that is able to observe all these changes that we go through.
And we can experience it right now by just being aware that you're aware that you're watching a video, you're listening to our audio. That awareness is who you are. There was a great story you tell a lot about the king who has very rich and very powerful, and he has a dream one night where he has lost everything. An enemy came and took everything away, and he became a slave and was destitute. And he wakes up the next day and goes, "Oh my God, that was so scary." And so he went to the guru and said, "What was real? Is this world real, that I'm the king and I'm powerful? Or was my dream real, that I have nothing?" And he said, "The awareness of you awake and the awareness in the dream is the only thing that's real." Right?
He said, neither one is real. Neither your dream that you experience destitute, or this reality of where you're the king, the powerful king. Neither of those are the absolute reality. They're Maya, right? They're part of the appearance of things. What is true and what is absolute and what is real is your awareness of those things. That one is constant. It's able to observe us being destitute and think in terms of, oh my God, what's going to happen to me in the long run? I'm going to die and all this stuff. Or it's also able to observe ourselves as powerful rulers of the world and, kind of in our power, in our glory.
I mean, if you think about just your life, you know your body has made all these changes, the environment has changed, but there's an awareness of yourself that's always been there, that constant. That's the true self.
Yes. And in meditation, what we're doing is
sneeze.
We're resting in that reality. That absolute reality. That's why it's so peaceful. That's why it's so restorative, because we're using our mind to look inward to that absolute reality and resting there instead of trying to find out in the external, ever-changing Maya of the world.
And the last question, is soul another word for consciousness? I guess it depends on how you define soul, but that would be the Atman, or?
Yeah. And the Upanishads say the Atman, the individual essence in you, is identical with Brahman, who is, or what is the universal consciousness, the ocean.
So there's no difference.
Consciousness. There is no difference. So that's why in some interpretations that people say you are God, right? That
the divine
that
in
the
me.
East is saying that you are God. In that sense, because the essence in you, meaning your awareness in you, is the absolute creative power of the universe. And it's an incredible journey. But again, this is not just an intellectual realization. What they're talking about is you actually having a direct experience of that. That's the realization.
Great. Well, we're going to talk about the brain on God next week to end our series on neuroscience, social neuroscience.
Easy for you to say.
Yes. And we want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just push the button below here in where our little icon is, and you can subscribe so you can make sure you don't miss any episodes. And we are here every week. And don't also forget to subscribe to us on Spotify, iTunes, where you listen to your podcast, so you can make sure that when we come live and you don't miss an episode. And we just enjoy having you here, and we will see you next week.
Next week, your brain on God.
Yes.
So
Take care.
join us.
Take care. Bye-bye.